What's up, Internet? John here from NextGen. I posted some pics of a cable I made a while back, and some people asked me how I make them and how I get them to look clean and professional. So I got Brett to pick up the camera and film the process. In this case, I'm making a 10-foot instrument cable for myself. I often skip minor steps when making stuff for myself, but I'll describe the steps we normally do for a customer's build as well. Naturally, I'll be using our NextGen Pro instrument cable, designed in Canada and manufactured in USA. I'm also using switchcraft plugs, which will be far superior than any aftermarket equivalents. They're just made of better quality materials and are easier to solder to, and the machining is far more precise. I mean, sure, we'd make more money if we just used cheaper plugs, but I'd rather make better cables. We have a bag of pre-cut heat shrink at our soldering station because we go through so much of it. For our cables, we use a high-grade heat shrink with a 2-to-1 ratio and a combination of 3/8 inch and 1/2 inch diameters, depending on the cable ends that the customer chooses. After gathering all the materials, I like to pre-bend the lugs and clamps on the plugs just a little. I'll explain why later. Then I preload all of the parts onto both cable ends. I can't tell you how many times I've soldered connections only to realize that I forgot to put the body, shield, or the heat shrink or something else on the cable first. And if you do that, the only solution is to cut the end of the cable off and start over again. So, after more mistakes than anyone needs to know about, I've got it pretty ingrained in my head now to preload everything on both ends first. The order of the parts is a 3-inch long piece of 1/2 inch heat shrink, the plug's body with the threads facing out, the plug's shield, and then a piece of 3/8 inch heat shrink that matches the length of the plug's body. Like I said, I actually prep both ends right from the start. That way there's no chance I can forget. The tension from the heat shrink is actually strong enough to hold everything in place, so you don't really have to worry about anything falling off unexpectedly. As soon as I have the parts loaded, I move on to prepping the first cable end. I use the plugs to determine where to strip the jacket off. I try to leave just enough to get past the little tab that sticks up on the ground plate. A lot of people like to use it to solder to the ground wire, but I actually find it much more useful to dig into the jacket a little and help with strain relief. Then I use my strippers to remove the jacket, pull the ground wire off to one side and twist it, and then I strip off about 2/3 of the inner black shield. A lot of people don't realize that the black jacket on the inside of the cable is actually conductive shielding. So if you leave it too far forward, you run the risk of grounding out your cable, or potentially causing intermittent grounding issues. So you should always strip it back. The next step is to strip off the stiffer clear jacket that's there to protect the main conductor. I strip it back about 1/3 of the way. That leaves plenty of wire to make a good connection, and there's still plenty of protection to avoid grounding out. I also cut the ground wire to about half the length. At this point, I begin soldering the joints. We'll do a full tutorial on soldering in the future. There's a lot of interesting discussion to be had on the subject, and I have a lot to say about it that won't really fit into this video. So look forward to that one in about a month or so. If you have strong opinions about soldering, just please hold them off until we get to our soldering tutorial video. Here's a quick overview of how I do it. First, I add flux to every contact surface, the wire, the ground plate, and the lugs. You can see that I ensure a good physical connection first. Then I tin the iron, flow solder deep enough to permeate the entire joint, and I keep the iron there until the excess flux is burned off. Flux is not only acidic, which makes the fumes bad for you, but the residue itself is bad for the lifespan of your solder joints. It's also conductive, so you really don't want to leave any of that residue behind. That's why when making cables for customers, we also clean the joint afterwards with isopropyl alcohol, 90% or better, to remove any remaining residue. Now you can see that I'm using the part of the plug that I bent out of position earlier to grip into the jacket for extra strain relief. And the process of bending it back to straight is also creating a good physical connection with the ground wire just from the pressure of the two parts trying to rest in opposite directions. Once everything is in position, I hold it in place at the end of the jacket with the helping hands, and then I flow solder through the wire onto the ground plate, completely permeating the wire and creating a solid bond with the ground plate. Notice again, I keep applying heat to ensure that the flux is burned off. And once again, if this were a customer's cable, I'd also clean the joint with isopropyl alcohol. Once that's done, I squeeze the cable clamps into place by bending them inwards on roughly a 45-degree angle. Not so tight that it cuts through the outer jacket, just tight enough to really hold everything in place securely. Then I slide the 3/8" heat shrink into position just behind the threads and use the heat gun to shrink it into place. Then the body is tightened as much as possible. On a customer's cable, I'd also add a dab of thread locker in there. You'll notice that piece of 3/8" heat shrink is just long enough to stick out the back of the body by about 1/4 of an inch, which will add some durability and strain relief to the pinch point at the exit of the plug. Finally, I slide the 1/2" piece of heat shrink over the entire body, and while sliding it into place, I try to line it up perfectly with the flat surface that's just at the end of the plug sleeve. Then I use the heat gun to shrink the end into place, and once that's in place, I shrink the rest of it down. This piece actually serves 3 functions. First, it's aesthetic. It looks pretty badass. Second, having that little lip over the front edge actually helps prevent it from sliding up and down the cable in future with all the pushing and pulling being done when the cable's being plugged in and out of things. And finally, the section overlapping the back edge actually adds significantly to the durability and strain relief of the cable's exit from the plug's body. Stuff that looks cool is cool. Stuff that serves a function is even cooler. Stuff that looks good while serving a function, that's badass. And that's it. Do the same thing to the other side, and you'll have a professional grade cable both aesthetically and functionally. All in all, it's probably less than $20 worth of parts, and you get a cable that's the equivalent of what you pay $40 or $50 for in the store. Do yourself a favor and celebrate with a jam afterwards. You've earned it. Stay tuned for our soldering tutorial. It will probably kick off a lot of internet arguments, which is always fun. Build safe and build awesome. This is John from NextGen. Have a good one.